Ladies and gentlemen, boa tarde. Welcome to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History's Sunday afternoon Black History Month Virtual Plus program. Today, Asala presents the program Warrior Queen Nzinga. Tell them we fought back. This Q&A session will be moderated by Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall, professor at John Jay College. The program will feature Vladimiro Fortuna, director of Angola's National Slavery Museum, and João Lourenço, director of the National Archives of Angola. The program will be conducted in Portuguese with English translation. But first, we will begin today's program with the singing of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, as performed by the 105 Voices of History under the direction of Roland M. Carter.
Lift every voice and sing. Lift every
And now, your host for today's Q&A, Attorney Gloria Brown Marshall.
Luanda, Angola is a mixture of cosmopolitan downtown skyscrapers, as well as the small buildings and makeshift houses that we know are part of any place of poverty. But the riches and the poverty stand shoulder to shoulder in Luanda. It's a vibrant place where the median age is 35 and it's so full of friendly people. I enjoyed it there, but I also felt the connection, the bloodline, the DNA connection with Angola, because it was the Angolan people who made up the first generations of Africans taken into the New World, taken into Virginia, becoming the Adam and Eve of the African American experience. Hello, my name is Professor Gloria Brown Marshall. I am an executive council member for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, a professor at John Jay College, and author of the book She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law, and Power, and the upcoming documentary film on Queen Nzinga. We're here with my guest, Vladimiro Fortuna, who is the director of the Slavery Museum in Luanda, Angola. I've had the pleasure to visit Luanda several times and to do research there for my book, She Took Justice. In this particular interview and panel discussion, we're going to ask about Queen Nzinga as well as slavery in Angola. The Black resistance that Queen Nzinga symbolizes was resistance against the Portuguese who had invaded Angola, then called Ndongo, and began to enslave the people there. I am joined today by Junior Rivas, who will be our interpreter. Let's begin. Hello, Director Vladimiro Fortuna.
Hola, Director Vladimiro Fortuna.
Okay, obrigado. Thank you for that invite. Yeah.
And what we want to talk about today on this panel on Queen Nzinga, who some people know and revere her legacy, and other people have never heard of. But Queen Nzinga existed during the time period in which the Portuguese had invaded Africa, and especially began their invasion in the area called Angola. So why is Queen Nzinga so important to Angola and to the world?
Vladimiro, ¿por qué a Rainha Nzinga Mbande é tão importante para Angola e para todo o mundo?
Muito obrigado. A Rainha Nzinga é muito importante para a história de Angola e para a história de todos descendentes da África, porque ela viveu num período crucial da história da escravatura e do tráfico de escravos. Trata-se do período que marca o fim do século XVI e início do século XVII. A Rainha Nzinga Mbande morreu aos 81 anos de idade. Nasceu em 1583. Nasceu em 1582, morreu em 1663. Morreu com 81 anos. Foi durante este período em que os portugueses dão início à colonização do território angolano, com a fundação da capitania de Luanda em 1575, e foi também durante esse período que começa uma intensa campanha de captura de escravizados no continente africano. Por essa altura, os portugueses estavam essencialmente baseados na região de Angola. Já haviam deixado as ilhas atlânticas de São Tomé e Cabo Verde e fixaram-se, sobretudo, nessa região de Luanda e do seu interior. Foi durante este período que os portugueses assumem o compromisso de abastecer as colônias espanholas na América do Norte com um número elevado de mão de obra africana. A partir deste dado, podemos notar o quão foi intenso o tráfico de escravos nesse período. E foi nesse período que a rainha Nzinga assume o poder no reino do Ndongo, que controlava uma região onde os portugueses decidiram fixar-se e capturar o maior número possível de escravizados para levar para as suas colônias na América do Sul e do Norte.
And so at this point, let's translate that part. And because the Portuguese is the translation into English by Junior, and so we'll summarize what Vladimiro Fortuna has just told us.
Queen Nzinga is important not just to the history of Angola, but to the history of all people of African descent. This is because of her prominence during a crucial time period in which there began a campaign by the Portuguese to enslave and capture people of Africa in order to ship them off into the New World to provide free labor for the newly found colonies. And throughout her 81 or so years of life, Queen Nzinga resisted against that enslavement and against that occupation of Angola, which was a critical territory to the Portuguese. And Queen Nzinga, as much as she could, resisted, and she fought against that enslavement and that transportation of her people, that capturing of her people.
And what was life like in Ndongo under the Portuguese as they began to oppress the people and institute slavery there?
¿Cómo era a vida no Ndongo quando os portugueses chegaram e começaram a escravizar dos angolanos?
O Ndongo, antes da chegada dos portugueses, era um agrupamento, era um reino criado 2 séculos antes da chegada dos portugueses. Por essa altura, vivia-se uma vida normal no que concerne à escravatura. Havia havia, tal como todas as outras sociedades, por essa altura vivia-se também períodos de escravatura no reino do Ndongo. Mas, como sabemos, a escravatura praticada em África tinha características diferentes daquelas praticadas em outras partes do mundo, sobretudo no Médio Oriente e na Europa. É verdade que, por essa altura, a Europa estava a terminar o período de escravatura, mas procurou dar início ao período de escravatura em outras regiões, particularmente em África, com a sua chegada no continente americano e com a criação de plantações nesta região. Por essa altura, os africanos tinham uma organização social que não diferia ou em nada era inferior à organização social verificada no continente europeu. Por essa altura, os africanos já dominavam as técnicas de extração de ferro e o ferro era um elemento importante no desenvolvimento da sociedade africana. Particularmente na região do Ndongo, o ferro era um elemento importante. Vamos ver que mesmo o termo Angola tem a sua origem na produção do ferro, que já se observava na sociedade do século XV, do século XVI, e o ferro constituía o elemento importante para a designação dos títulos dos reis, para a designação dos estatutos que os cidadãos alcançavam naquela sociedade. E os europeus encontram uma vida social normal, uma sociedade humana que, com processos sociais não tão diferentes daqueles que se observavam a nível da Europa, com algumas diferenças, é claro. Em termos de tecnologia, havia a diferenciação em alguns aspectos. Os africanos revelavam-se mais avançados em determinadas técnicas e os europeus, em outras técnicas, revelavam-se também mais avançados. Havia a admiração tanto por uns como pelos outros. Por essa altura, havia também, diante dessa admiração que existia entre uns e os outros, a necessidade ou o interesse em cooperar pelo reconhecimento de técnicas avançadas manifestadas uns pelos outros. É este ambiente social que os europeus encontram no continente africano. E é este ambiente social também que os europeus procuram destruir, porque os europeus traziam interesses que não se ajustavam aos interesses dos africanos.
Well, let's have a translation for what's been said thus far.
The kingdom of Ndongo was established about 2 centuries or so before the first Portuguese ships arrived. And when the Portuguese did arrive, they could already find a stable society with a government already in place. In terms of slavery, it is true that slavery did exist in Africa at this time. However, slavery in Africa had different characteristics to that was practiced in Europe or the Middle East. For example, in Africa, slavery was more so perceived as a punishment for a crime or for disloyalty, in which once one was rehabilitated or considered rehabilitated, they were readmitted back into society and their servitude would end. Contrast that to the slavery practiced in Europe and then later America, in which that bondage was perpetual and even passed down between generations. Furthermore, slavery in Europe and the Americas was more so for economic purposes, to fuel the growing industries and plantations in the growing colonies, the European colonies. Whereas in Africa, slavery was more seen as a social cause in which once was rehabilitated, they were able to, earn their place back in society. And the Europeans were also perplexed by the social structure in Africa when they arrived, which very much differed from that of Europe, in which there was plenty of hierarchy. In Africa, nobody was really seen as inferior to another. Everybody was seen as part of one society.
And enslavement, in order to feed the growing encroaching into the new world from the old world. And many people think that England began the slave trade, but actually England was late to the slave trade. The Portuguese began the European slave trade into Africa. And the 20 and odd Africans who arrived in the Virginia colony were part of the Portuguese attack of Angola. So what was slavery like when the Portuguese began to oppress the Africans in order to feed the labor needed for the New World? To simplify the question, what was slavery and oppression like in Angola under the Portuguese?
Vladimiro, conta-nos como foi a escravidão na Angola quando os portugueses chegaram na Angola.
A escravatura em África apresentava características particulares. Os indivíduos eram tornados escravizados em África por dívida, por desvio de comportamento na sociedade e por crimes cometidos. Também os indivíduos eram tornados escravos por prática de feitiçaria. Esses eram os principais motivos pelos quais os indivíduos eram tornados escravos. E a escravatura na sociedade africana servia para reeducar o indivíduo para depois ser inserido na sociedade com uma conduta diferente. Por isso é que nós, ao lermos a história dos reinos em África e a história encontramos a história de indivíduos que foram escravizados e que depois foram inseridos na sociedade, muitos deles até tornaram-se chefes na sociedade, tornaram-se soberanos, muitos até tornaram-se reis. Porque a escravatura em África, a principal diferença existente entre a escravatura em África e a escravatura praticada na Europa era que a escravatura praticada em África não tinha aquele caráter comercial e de acentuada exploração. Ao passo que a escravatura é praticada tanto no Médio Oriente como a nível da Europa, tinha essas características. Era uma escravatura caracterizada pela acentuada exploração, muito ligada ao comércio, a questões econômicas e com muita violência e crueldade. Esses aspectos não existiam a nível da escravatura praticada na sociedade africana. Portanto, sabemos que o fenômeno da escravatura é antigo e inerente a todas as sociedades humanas. Todas as sociedades humanas, a determinada fase do seu desenvolvimento, observaram a escravatura. Mas a escravatura praticada a nível da África, da Angola, tinha características específicas, diferenciava-se em grande medida da escravatura praticada pelos europeus na Europa e pelos os povos do Médio Oriente. Portanto, essa escravatura praticada no Médio Oriente e a nível da Europa é, a determinada altura, transferida para o continente africano. E foi assim que começamos a observar os africanos a serem escravizados, mas inseridos no quadro da escravatura praticada pelos europeus e praticadas pelos os indivíduos, os povos do Médio Oriente.
To reiterate Vladimiro's points, slavery did exist in Africa before the Portuguese arrived. However, it was much more different than that which happened after the Africans were brought into the New World. As mentioned, slavery was more so to pay a debt to society. And as Vladimiro mentions, there are even stories of former slaves becoming part of political life, becoming kings and queens after their servitude, which was definitely not possible in the European style slavery in which bondage was for your entire life. So, although slavery was practiced in Africa, as in all societies, freedom was possible in Africa. And that's why there was so much resistance against the European style of slavery, of transporting people from one place to another and keeping them perpetually in bondage. That's why Queen Nzinga, among others, resisted the slave trade and fought against the slave trade, even though, yes, slavery did exist in Africa, but it was because it was such conceivably a different in many ways.
And so in the midst of all of this, we have Princess Nzinga, who is sent by her brother, who's now has arose to be king. And in being king, he is the Ngola, Ngola, from which they get the name Angola for the country. He becomes the Ngola, the king. There is a need to negotiate a peace treaty. The peace treaty was negotiated by Queen Nzinga as princess at the time, the sister. So the king sends his sister Nzinga in 1622 to negotiate this peace treaty with João de Sousa for the freedom, or at least some brokering of peace between the Portuguese and Angola and the Ndongan people. So in 1622, Princess Nzinga arrives to negotiate this peace treaty because the Portuguese have fomented violence throughout the land of Ndongo, which is, some people have said, as large as Angola is now and the Congo. Government was not in a part of what the English or the Portuguese or any European had to give to Africa. Africa already had a governmental structure. And so in 1622, when Princess Nzinga negotiates this peace treaty, she is then told to sit on the floor as she negotiates. She refuses. She claps her hands, and her maid servants come and give their backs so that she can sit on their backs and negotiate a peace treaty in 1622 with the Portuguese. The question I have for you, Vladimiro, is what was the life of a woman and the life of Princess Nzinga, who then became queen, as the slave trade got larger and larger, to the point where there were Angolans then taken into North and South America, and she sees this. So from the standpoint of Princess Nzinga, who became queen, how was it that a woman could rise up during a time period of enslavement in Angola and to lead warriors? So she's a diplomat and a warrior herself, to lead warriors in battle against the Portuguese. What was it like? I've had a chance to go to your museum, and I've seen the types of arms, as you said, the technology that the Africans had. But what was the technology? What was the battle like between the Africans led by Queen Nzinga fighting, resisting the incursion of the Portuguese, and the battle with the metal, the iron that now the Portuguese had? What were those battles like between the Africans and the Portuguese as they fought over freedom and the future of Angola? My question, what was the battle like? What was it like for those Africans and the Portuguese as they battled against each other during that time period?
Vladimiro, ¿cómo fue esa guerra entre os angolanos y os portugueses, específicamente la tecnología? ¿Cuáles fueron as diferencias entre os portugueses e os angolanos?
A novidade, os portugueses chegam em Angola com uma novidade. Trata-se da arma de fogo. E a arma de fogo fazia, por essa altura, uma grande diferença em todas as partes em que os europeus atuavam. Não só em África, mas tanto na Ásia como em outras partes do mundo em que os portugueses ou os europeus procuravam fazer invasões, a arma de fogo era um elemento que fazia a diferença a favor dos europeus. Mas deixa-me dizer que as armas em que os europeus encontraram, que eram usadas pelos os africanos quando os europeus chegaram em África, eram as flechas com pontas envenenadas, eram os machados, eram as facas. E também esses instrumentos fizeram uma grande diferença nas lutas contra a invasão europeia e contra o tráfico de escravos. Tanto é que muitas das vezes os africanos venceram batalhas. Só para notar que a rainha Nzingha nunca foi capturada. A rainha Nzingha perdeu poucas batalhas. A maior parte das batalhas feitas pela rainha Nzingha, ela teve vitórias. A rainha Nzingha morreu soberana. Ela morreu em liberdade. Nunca foi capturada pelos portugueses. A partir daqui podemos notar a grande força, a organização dos exércitos africanos e os meios que eles usavam no combate contra a escravatura e contra a invasão europeia. Para além de outras táticas que foram usadas no domínio político e diplomático. A primeira atuação da rainha Nzingha, ainda enquanto princesa, notamos logo o seu pensamento político, na medida em que o que ela levou como negociação era o fim do pagamento de tributos em escravos que o governo colonial português exigia às comunidades africanas. E ela, na sua habilidade de negociante e de diplomata, conseguiu esse feito. Foi abolido. Depois daquele encontro na fortaleza de São Miguel, foi abolido o pagamento de impostos ou de tributos através de escravizados. Uma prática que veio a verificar-se mais tarde, razão pela qual os portugueses depois começaram a adotar o ataque às comunidades, a promover as guerras para a captura de escravizados nas comunidades africanas. A partir deste elemento, podemos notar o pensamento político da rainha Nzingha. Um outro elemento importante que se destaca no pensamento político é a ideia de unidade africana. A rainha Nzingha promoveu uma coligação dos vários reinos existentes no atual território angolano. A rainha Nzingha começou por fazer uma coligação com o reino do Congo. Depois alargou essa coligação com os outros reinos a sul do território angolano para fazerem uma forte frente na luta contra os europeus que procuravam não só praticar o tráfico de escravizados, mas como também procuravam tomar o controle das principais rotas comerciais existentes no território angolano.
The possession of firearms was a tremendous advantage for the Europeans in the battlefield. It was very difficult to compete against the firearms and guns that the Portuguese had. But even so, let's not forget that throughout her entire life, Queen Nzinga was never captured by the Portuguese. And in fact, she was victorious in plenty of battles against the Portuguese, even without, their fancy guns or sometimes superior technology. That was because of her ability to strategize, her ability to forge an army and create alliances with other armies that were able to overpower the Portuguese in many instances, even without all the fancy weapons that the Europeans had, and were continuing to produce with the help of the iron extraction that was happening in Angola at the time. So we must never forget Queen Nzinga's leadership, her ability to command an army, to guide an army through battle, to strategize. That made all of the difference in the battlefield. It wasn't just about the weapons, it was also about the plan.
So, Vladimiro, the situation that Queen Nzinga had to face when the peace treaties were ignored by the Portuguese and she had to fight, what was the weaponry between the Africans on one side and the Portuguese on the other side, the technology difference? What were the battles like between the forces led by Queen Nzinga, the warrior, who had tried to be a diplomat with them but could not and had to go to violence? What was the technology like between the Africans and the Portuguese as they battled for freedom of the Africans and the overtaking of the country by the Portuguese?
Vladimiro, quais foram as diferenças em a tecnologia entre os africanos e os portugueses em las batalhas que a rainha Nzinga comandou?
Precisamos partir de um ponto para compreender as diferenças tecnológicas e a evolução das sociedades por essa altura. Por essa altura, as tecnologias mais avançadas no mundo, por essa altura, eram efetivamente a arma de fogo e o barco à vela. Eu penso que essas eram as tecnologias mais avançadas, melhoradas pelos europeus e que começaram a fazer uma grande diferença nas expedições que eram feitas pelos europeus. Esse fenômeno não se verifica apenas no continente africano, mas se verifica em todas as outras partes do planeta Terra em que os europeus conseguiram alcançar. Tanto ela deu-lhes a possibilidade de alcançar regiões distantes e a arma de fogo fez uma grande diferença na conquista desses espaços que foram alcançados. Por dois motivos. A arma de fogo, pela grande diferença que faz na guerra, tornou-se um produto importante e muito procurado por todos os grupos que propunham-se a fazer a guerra. E, ao mesmo tempo, tornou-se um elemento de desestabilização social, o que facilitou as conquistas dos territórios e dos povos por parte dos europeus, porque eles é que detinham essa tecnologia que acabava por ser uma inovação a nível não só em relação à Europa e à África, mas em relação à Europa, à Ásia, em relação à Europa e à América. E os europeus sempre procuraram tirar vantagens por serem os detentores deste produto que constituía uma novidade tecnológica. Mas sem desprumor das armas usadas pelos africanos nos combates contra os europeus. Os africanos inicialmente usaram as flechas com pontas envenenadas, que eram muito mortíferas. Os europeus tiveram muitas dificuldades, mesmo com as armas de fogo, tiveram muitas dificuldades para dominar os territórios e para dominar os povos. Só que, pelas características apresentadas pelas sociedades africanas, não havia muitas facilidades em tomar aldeias, em tomar povos, em dominar povos. Portanto, a África que temos hoje é muito diferente da África que tínhamos no século XV, tínhamos no século XVI, tínhamos no século XVII. Nós não tínhamos territórios constituídos ou estados constituídos como temos hoje. Tínhamos comunidades isoladas que podiam ser facilmente invadidas e atacadas, e até as comunidades organizarem-se em exército para combater contra a invasão europeia era um elemento era muito difícil acontecer. E a África foi sendo tomada assim paulatinamente. Mas, apesar de tudo, houve uma grande resistência por parte dos africanos. Tanto é que a colonização em África começa formalmente depois da Conferência de Berlim, estamos a falar do século XIX, e a ocupação efetiva em África levou muito tempo. Portanto, por aquilo que podemos dizer de presença efetiva e instalação da administração colonial no continente africano, eu penso que esse ambiente verificou-se em menos de um século. Apesar de a presença europeia ser registrada desde finais do século XV e início do século XVI no continente africano, a colonização como tal, ou o domínio total do continente africano, só vai se registrar em finais do século XIX e princípios do século XX.
And we'll stop there.
Nós temos regiões em África que nem sequer foram colonizadas.
And we'll have a translation, please.
As mentioned previously, the possession of firearms did greatly benefit the Europeans. But that doesn't mean that the Africans were completely helpless in their resistance to the occupation of their land. They also had weaponry that routinely stumped the Europeans on the battlefield, such as poisoned arrows, such as machetes and other cutting tools, such as animals that they were able to command and use as weapons in the battlefield. But even more so than the weaponry, it was Queen Nzinga's diplomacy that truly changed the course of the battles. Her ability to create alliances, her political thought. Queen Nzinga envisioned a united Africa against Portuguese or against any European invasion. She even created an alliances with the King of the Congo, and they were able to outnumber the Portuguese in many battles. The Africa of today is very different from the Africa that once was part of Queen Nzinga's during Queen Nzinga's time. Unfortunately, Africa today is very divided, but during Queen Nzinga was able to unify Africa in many ways, and that gave her the strength, the numbers to win plenty of battles against the Portuguese. So yes, the weaponry was a big part of it, but Queen Nzinga's diplomacy, her ability to create alliances, her intelligence, her strategicness, that all of that was probably the greatest weapon that the Angolans and the Africans had in their favor.
Thank you. I thank you so much for joining us, Vladimiro Fortuna, Director of the Slave Museum in Luanda, to talk about Black resistance and Queen Nzinga, the slave trade, and the African alliance with African Americans. The 20 and odd Africans who arrived in the Virginia colony in 1619 were from Angola. I look forward to continued travels to that country, and I thank you so much for your work on slavery, your work in Luanda, and your continued bridge between Angola and the African American community. Obrigada.
Okay. Thank you too. And I would like to thank for this opportunity to talk to my brothers and sisters in the United States. I think that we have a very strong connection that we must preserve, and we must continue to work and to preserve this that history. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. She took justice, the Black woman, law, and power. Begins with the story of Queen Nzinga. And she was one of many African warrior queens. Her story of resistance, though, is historic and needs to be known by everyone. Queen Nzinga. Anna de Sousa, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba, lived between about 1582 or 83 to 1663. She fought against the Portuguese invaders and tried as best she could to resist the ongoing slave trade. She took justice. During my visit to Luanda, Angola in 2019 and 2022, I visited the military museum. Queen Nzinga stands in front of this museum, guarding it, per se, but also inside of the military museum are tiles created in her honor. These tiles depict Queen Nzinga in that historic moment when she sat on the back of her maidservants in order to negotiate the peace treaty with the Portuguese. It also depicts Queen Nzinga when she was baptized into the Catholic Church. And she did this in order, as a diplomat, to better able, she thought, the Angolans or Ndongo people to curry favor, perhaps, with the government of Portugal. Queen Nzinga also fought against the Portuguese all of her entire life. I begin my book, She Took Justice, with the story of the resistance that Queen Nzinga and so many of the Ndongo people had to the Portuguese invasion. Queen Nzinga, Black resistance. She is such a symbol. We should all know more about her. And next we have, to discuss Queen Nzinga, Dr. João Lorenzo, Director of the National Archives of Angola. Dr. Lorenzo, you are an historian, a professor, and you could learn and teach about anything. Why is Queen Nzinga important to you?
A história da Rainha Nzinga é importante por aquilo que ela representa.
The story of Queen Nzinga is important because of what she represents, because of her historical trajectory, and also because of her historical legacy. As a woman, and as a member of the Ndongo royal court, she had a very interesting record. And the first question we can ask is, how did she know how to read and write? Nzinga Mbande was the monarch of Ndongo and Matamba. She was the daughter of Ngola Kiluanji and the sister of Ngola Mbande. Later she became the queen of Ndongo and Matamba. It is a very interesting journey because she begins by representing her brother as ambassador in negotiations with the Portuguese. He took her to Luanda in 1622, her first voyage, where she was then baptized by the Portuguese. And why did she act as ambassador? Well, because she, as a member of the royal court, knew how to read and write. Many people often ask, how was that possible? How did Queen Nzinga know how to read and write? Nzinga Mbande was born in 1583. The first Portuguese missionaries arrived in Ndongo in 1560. That is to say, 20 years or so before Nzinga was born, writing was already introduced in Ndongo. When Nzinga was born, she could already find works of writing in Ndongo, and that allowed her, as a member of the royal court, to become educated. This explanation is important because many people question the signatures on the documents and the letters that she wrote that are now in the Vatican. This knowledge of writing precisely allowed her to have access to literature and to knowledge of the world, in turn allowing her to become a diplomat, a skillful diplomat. After that, with the death of her brother, she assumed the throne of Ndongo and initiated a war in Matamba. Nzinga was the queen of two kingdoms, Ndongo and Matamba, of which itself is something unique. This was due to her ability to create alliances and to strategize, which she gained when she had troubles in Ndongo. After allying with Matamba, she was able to acquire power from Matamba, and so Queen Nzinga reigned. As I said, it was her trajectory and legacy. Nzinga lives in the collective memory of Angolans. In Angola, Nzinga Mbande is a reference. In other words, she is something that must be remembered today, that comes from a place of history, what the French would call le devoir de mémoire. Nzinga Mbande is a le devoir de mémoire for Angolans. She is so because of her path to power, her royalty, and more importantly, because she is a role model for all women. Truly, she represents resistance and the ability to fight. But she is also an example for women from African societies who have always been perceived as having a historically subordinate status, something that is not true. Nzinga is one example, but there are other examples. So that capacity of women to lead and to establish international relations is incredibly powerful. I had the opportunity to travel to the Netherlands, where I went to the archives of Holland and discovered a correspondence of Nzinga Mbande with the King of Holland. Nzinga Mbande negotiated with the King of Holland. I also have a colleague, Alexandra Aparacio, who went to the Vatican City and found a correspondence of Nzinga in the Vatican. Therefore, that legacy, that memory, that resilience, that symbol of fighting back makes Nzinga Mbande important for Angolans and part of the collective memory of Angolans.
Que foi ao Vaticano e tem correspondência de Nzinga Mbande no Vaticano. Portanto, esse legado, essa memória, essa capacidade de resistência, esse símbolo de luta torna Nzinga Mbande importante para os angolanos e para a memória coletiva de nós os angolanos.
Dr. Lorenzo, tell us about the statue of Queen Nzinga that stands in front of the military museum.
Aquela estátua foi construída pelas instituições.
The statue of Queen Nzinga that stands in the Museum of Military History in Luanda was built collaboratively by the Angolan state, most notably the Ministry of Culture and the Historical Archives of Angola. The statue was built by a team of Angolan historians. Several people worked on that project, including Dr. Rosa Cruz e Silva, who is a historian and who was the previous director of the National Archives. The statue was built precisely to contradict the image that was created of Nzinga by the Europeans. The Nzinga that is in the Museum of Military History is precisely a response, because that image that was created by the gentleman, the Frenchman Castillon, is too European. The statue does not have a crown as a symbol of power. It is based on African symbols. It was created in the image of Nzinga with symbols of Ndongo. She is holding an axe with the word Angola inscribed in iron. On her head, she does not wear a crown. She is Nzinga. She is the symbol of power, not the crown. Angolan royalty did not wear crowns. And many people ask, why is she wearing a skirt? Well, in Ndongo, in this time period, there was no such idea as modesty. There was no idea that women could not show their knees. After all, Nzinga was a warrior. A warrior. She wouldn't be able to fight with a skirt all the way down to her ankles like so many women in Europe wore. She had to be comfortable. And so that statue of Queen Nzinga that stands is a response, with African symbols, not European ones, like the image we were raised to believe in. It was with that purpose that the statue was created and is now revered by so many Angolans. Her statue also appears on the 20 Kwanza coin, which is part of the currency of Angola.
De 20 kwanzas, em que aquela imagem também foi associada.
Like any historic figure, especially a person who lived over 400 years ago, there are myths and stories that surround that person's life. What are some of the myths that you believe were created around Queen Nzinga? Which ones do you think are true and which are deadly false?
Portanto, Nzingambande era uma soberana, era uma guerreira temível.
Nzinga Mbande was a monarch. She was a fearsome warrior. The Portuguese feared her. Therefore, it's no coincidence that they would create stories precisely to tarnish her image and weaken her authority. And many of them were believable because she always had this mixture of reality and myth surrounding her. And in that time, she became a myth, a legend, so to speak. The incident about her killing her brother and the incident about her killing her brother's son, it's important to clarify everything for everybody. That was a falsehood launched by the Portuguese. Nzinga Mbande did not kill Ngola Mbande or her nephew, because her brother had great trust in her. And it's important to understand the following. Who said that Queen Nzinga killed her brother? It was the Portuguese. It was Cadornega, a Portuguese military, who says this. Cadornega was an enemy to Nzinga, so he spread propaganda against her. It's necessary to understand this. Nzinga was fully trusted by Ngola Mbande, and when it is said that she killed her brother for the sake of the throne, that is not true. Anthropologically speaking, this could be explained because her nephew was not even a threat. In contrast to Europe, the notion that a minor could take power and then reign was not part of the culture of Ndongo or those cultures around it. To be a ruler in Ndongo, one must have been above the age of maturity. One must provide proof of maturity and also provide proof of the ability to lead. A minor would not have met those conditions to assume power. By extension, the nephew of Nzinga, the son of Ngola Mbande, was not a candidate for power because he was a minor. he did not represent a threat. The only ones who could have taken power were her sisters, who were always with her. So for me, that belief that she killed her brother and nephew, that was part of the propaganda launched by the Portuguese against Nzinga.
Para mim, esse discurso de que ele matou o irmão e o sobrinho, para mim, faz parte da propaganda dos portugueses contra a Nzinga.
As an African American woman, Queen Nzinga's story, her heroics, her diplomacy, all of this is such a life lesson. I felt empowered by reading her story, and I think other women will too. But I just wonder, when men read the story of Queen Nzinga, what does it mean to them? I know it should be important to other Black women and women who care about taking agency and standing up to obstacles, especially when it seems that the obstacles are insurmountable. And she did this, not just as a symbol, but as a woman who had to deal with issues of gender as well as race. But men can learn a lot from Queen Nzinga as well. What have you learned from studying Queen Nzinga's life?
Pelo que ela representa.
What does she represent? Well, for me, Nzinga is a symbol that it is not an issue to be a man or a woman to lead. It is not an issue to be a man or a woman to do things well. She is an example of that. In the middle of the 17th century, in the circumstances that she lived through, she had the ability to resist. I was asked, how is it possible she could direct two kingdoms? That was not an easy thing in the 17th century, especially with the condition of women. Thus, for me, I care because of what she represents: resistance, struggle, and the collective memory of Angolans. She also embodies the heroism of the Angolan people. She represents the independence of women. Today we are in a world in which there is increasing debate about the status of women, their emancipation and their rights, and all the possibilities of women assuming powers of responsibility, especially in Angola and in other parts of the world. She represents a symbol of the capacity of leadership and resistance of women. Nzinga Mbande provides countless reasons why women want to know more about her. It's not for nothing that there are so many women in Angola who carry her name or give themselves her name. We have young singers in their 20s and 30s whose music appeals to the heroism of Nzinga, and some even call themselves Nzinga. So that resilience, that symbol of women, she represents all of that.
Capacidade de resistência, esse símbolo das mulheres, ela representa tudo isso.
Queen Nzinga did indeed fight the Portuguese. She resisted their invasion. History and UNESCO bear this out. We have all of this evidence, but tell us, outside of the history of Queen Nzinga, why is she important to people around the world? Why should she be so important to African Americans as well?
Independentemente daquilo que aconteceu com os nossos antepassados.
Regardless of what happened to our ancestors who were taken and enslaved in the Americas, African Americans should know that there was resistance on this side, in various parts of Africa. In the case of Angola, there was resistance, and Queen Nzinga is a symbol of that resistance. African Americans should not believe that the result of slavery was without a fight. There was a fight, and that is very important to know. Queen Nzinga is a symbol of that, and that is important. They must also realize that we should not accept this idea that women in Africa have always had a subordinate role or an inferior role. Queen Nzinga represents that as well. Women in Africa have always been fundamental players, not just in everyday life or domestic life, but also in political life and in governance of the state. Women have always played an important role, like Nzinga. We can give other examples, but since we're talking about Nzinga, she represents just that. Lastly, this collective memory of Angolans should also be part of the collective memory of African Americans. Queen Nzinga is part of the collective memory of African Americans. I think they should consider all of these aspects.
Faz parte da memória coletiva dos afro-africanos. Eu acho que devem fixar nesses três aspectos.
Thank you so much for joining us today as we discussed Queen Nzinga, Anna de Sousa Mbande, ruler of Ndongo and Matamba. I'd like to also thank our guests, Dr. João Lorenzo, Director of the National Archives of Angola, as well as Vladimiro Fortuna, Director of the National Slave Museum in Luanda, Angola. Queen Nzinga, she took justice. She is also a national and international symbol of Black resistance. Tell them we fought back. My name is Gloria J. Brown Marshall, professor and author of the book, She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law, and Power.
Thank you for joining us for our program, Warrior Queen Nzinga. Tell them we fought back. Please be sure to join us for our upcoming programs that will be underway throughout the entire month of February. On Monday, February the 6th, Asala presents the first of 3 Asala virtual author book talks. This program will begin at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Tuesday, February the 7th, Asala presents the program African American Music and the Struggle for Freedom. This program will kick off at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Wednesday, February the 8th, Asala, in partnership with the National Park Service, presents Walk in the Footsteps of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. In this spellbinding first-person delivery, Dr. Woodson will take visitors from the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site on an interpretive journey to Dr. Woodson's residence in the Shaw neighborhood of Washington, D.C. This walking tour will start promptly at 11 a.m. Eastern and is open to the public. To register, please go to our website at www.asalh.org. On Thursday, February the 9th, Asala presents Call and Response, Liberation Theology, Resistance, and the Black Church. This program will begin at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. On Monday, February 13th, Asala will present the second of our 3 virtual author book talks. This program will begin promptly at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Wednesday, February the 15th, Asala will present the program Poetry, Fighting with Words, Then and Now. This program will begin at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Wednesday, February the 15th, PBS Books presents its second Books Author Talk featuring New York Times reporter Jonathan Abrams in conversation with Angel Ito. This program will be going live from 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Thursday, February 16th, Asala will present the Carter G. Woodson Home Grand Reopening Preview Program. This program will start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Sunday, February 19th, Asala presents Preserving Black Resistance. This program begins at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Tuesday, February the 21st, Asala presents the 2023 Annual Book Prize event. This program will kick off at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Wednesday, February the 22nd, Asala presents the virtual marquee event, A Conversation with Secretary Lonnie Bunch III of the Smithsonian Institution. Professor Gloria Brown Marshall of John Jay College will be the host and interviewer. This program will begin at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Thursday, February the 23rd, Asala presents Resistance and the Black Press. This event will start at 7 o'clock Eastern on Asala TV. On Saturday, February the 25th, Asala presents The Chisholm Effect, National Tour, Campaign 72. This performance will be held at the Arc Theater, located at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast in Washington, D.C. Performance begins at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. For more information on how to acquire tickets, please visit our website or call our office for more information. And on Monday, February 27th, Asala presents the final installment of the virtual Author Book Talks, beginning at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Tuesday, February the 28th, Asala will conclude the month-long festival with our closing program starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. We would also like to thank our sponsors who have made this festival possible with their generous support and financial contributions. First, we would like to thank our legacy sponsors and our History Maker sponsors, our preservation sponsors, and our media sponsors. Without your help and support, this event would not be possible. If you would like more information on how to be a sponsor or a member of Asala, please go to our website at www.asalh.org to learn more about how you can become a part of History in the Making with Asala. Or you can contact our offices at 202-238-5912. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell for our YouTube channel, Asala TV, so you can be alerted to all of our programming when we go live. You can also follow us on our social media platforms via Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for the latest information pertaining to all of our virtual events for 2023. We look forward to seeing you at our next event right here on Asala TV.
one still secret spot where dreams may go, and a sheltered soul may thrive and grow, where doubt and fear are not. Oh, keep a place apart within your heart. Oh, keep a place apart within your heart. For